Thank you so much for watching. Today we're going to be taking a look at the Season 40 cast, Winners at War. And this is my first Survivor video, so if you guys could please like, comment, subscribe, it would be greatly appreciated and encourage me to keep going. And yeah, I'm going to be doing a 3-part series. This will be the first 7 winners of the 20-member cast of Winners at War. And let's just jump right into it. First winner we're going to look at, Ethan Zohn. And I got to be honest, when I first saw that Ethan was on the cast, my first reaction was just pure excitement. I've been watching Survivor since I was 11 years old, and so the idea that someone who won back when I was 12 playing again is really exciting. It's kind of similar to when I saw Kelly Wigglesworth was going to be in season 31. She wasn't even one of my favorite players, but there just is something to be said for having really veteran players on the cast. Now, Ethan is obviously a likable guy. He's the epitome of a survivor, both on and off the survivor court. Everyone has the debate whether old school players actually have a chance to win. I would like to say that if someone's continued to watch and follow the game, they have just as good of a shot of winning as someone who's new, but we actually haven't really seen that. Good examples would be Kimmy, Kelly Wigglesworth. It seems like a lot of times it's not even them playing like an old school game, it's a safe game. But a lot of the more old school games are safe games. No block voting, sticking along tribal lines, kind of playing it safe in that way. Even Jervis from season 27, we didn't really see him step up. He just wanted to try to make it to the end. But if Ethan's continued to watch, and if he's as likable as he used to be, then I think he has an excellent shot of going pretty far. Let's take a look at Ethan's tribe, the Red Tribe. I actually think this is a really good tribe for Ethan to be on. There are a lot of bigger threats, obviously, in Rob, Parvati, Natalie, Jeremy, everyone over on this side. And then Ben's a huge threat. And so I think a lot of people will be kind of not necessarily playing it safe, but all of them are obviously nervous going in, but just trying to make sure to stick in the game. I can't see Ethan being a first boot. It would just be really surprising unless there are pregame alliances that he's just not a part of. But I can see Ethan being a really early post-merge boot. There are a lot of people you don't want to sit with at the end in this game. It's obviously all winners, but Ethan just is so likable, everything that he's been through in his life. He's definitely a competition threat, even though he is 46 now. And so I can see him being an early post-merge boot. And I thought about doing where I think everyone will fall, when I think they're going to get voted out. But I decided against that. It's just really hard to tell. But in general, I do see Ethan going post-merge because no one would want to sit with him at the end. But in general, I'm just really excited to see how he plays again. I hope he steps it up. I made a couple of lists that I had posted on Facebook to a group called Survivor Obsessed Chat. If you guys aren't members of that group, I definitely suggest you sign up. It's an excellent community. But one of the lists that I made was players who won after they lost, players who lost after they won, and players who have never lost before. And Ethan actually falls in the category of players who have lost after they won. So not only has he won, but he also knows what it feels like to lose. Whether that'll make him try that much harder or change his strategy, we'll just have to wait and see. And then also I made a list of players who were beaten by other players on this cast. And so obviously Ethan falls under the category of someone who was beaten by Amber in Season 8 All-Stars. So he was one of the 2 or 3 I was the most excited to see on this cast, one that I'm rooting for, and I hope he goes pretty far. The next player we're going to be taking a look at, the queen herself, Sandra Diaz Twine. And little personal note, I actually got to meet her after Game Changers, and I'm actually in China now, but 2 years ago, I moved back out there in May, and we got to meet her. She was extremely nice. It was cool to see my dad starstruck because, Survivor's a family show for me, but no one in my family is into it as I am. But when he met Sandra, it was almost like he did. I go to these cast events, and it was almost like he didn't realize exactly what that would feel like. And then I think going to Game Changers with him, going to a all-star cast was a good one, as opposed to an all new player season, because these are people that we've been watching for so many years. But Sandra, she's a big threat, and here's why she's a big threat. She is a big threat because she's a 2-time winner, but I think that no one wants to take the idea that there could be two-time winners away from the other 19 players, or if you're one of them, the other 18 players who haven't won twice. What's interesting is that if Sandra winds up winning again, she'll be the only three-time winner, and then everyone else will have won once. But if Sandra does not pull out the win here, then obviously there will be two-time winners. On top of that, someone could actually have a better track record than her. Because if she loses season 40, then she winds up 2 for 2. She won her first 2 seasons, and then if she loses Winners at War, she will have lost that and Game Changers. Whereas, say, someone, especially from the new cast who are not players who have lost before, if someone winds up winning that's like a Wendell, then he'll be 2 for 2 and she'll be 2 for 4. So someone could and probably will actually wind up walking out of the season with a better track record than her. I loved watching her on Pearl Islands. A lot of people remember her from Heroes vs. Villains, but I got to rewatch Pearl Islands recently, and she's just so entertaining. But what's interesting is I don't know that she would have won Pearl Islands if she hadn't been up against Lil, someone who was a part of one of the twists that is considered one of the absolute worst twists that there's ever been. But I was happy that she won. I was definitely rooting for Rupert, to be honest, in that season as well. But she was great television. And then Heroes vs. Villains, I'll be honest, I was rooting for Parvati, but I definitely am a believer in whoever wins deserves to win. Does that mean that's the person I was rooting for? Not necessarily, not always, not even usually. But if a person wins, they definitely deserve to win. Maybe I would have voted for someone else, but we're not on the cast. We're on our couches. In Game Changers, it was interesting to watch her play a third time to see if she was going to change up her game. And she did seem to play a little more aggressively. She's known for the as long as it's not me strategy. And in that season, it did seem like she was kind of trying to position herself at the beginning of the game, but obviously she got taken out in one of the craziest tribal councils to date, and I'm very anxious to see how she'll fare. I think she's really likely to get booted pretty early. Let's take a look at her tribe. She's on the blue tribe. I think it was smart for them to put Amber and Sandra together. Sandra and Rob obviously have a huge connection. Amber and Rob obviously have a huge connection. And I'm sure by proxy, Amber and Sandra are connected. But if these three players are going to be on a two-tribe season, then it makes sense for them to put the two of them together. Because I think it wouldn't be fair for them to put Amber with Rob or Sandra with Rob, but at the same time, that might have made them that much bigger of a target. Her tribe is interesting compared to the other tribe. Still some older players, but it doesn't feel nearly as old school as the Red Tribe to me, even though we do have plenty of people who played earlier on in the history of Survivor with Yul, Amber, Sandra. But I think one thing that Sandra does have going for her is the fact that she's on a tribe with Sarah, because in all the preseason interviews, a lot of people are saying that they consider Sarah to be the biggest threat, or that would be their first boot pick. I would say Sandra has several buffers in her tribe, because she seems like someone you would want to take out early, because you don't want her to be the only three-time winner. You want to give someone else the opportunity to be a two-time winner. But if you look at her tribe, even Tyson, even Wendell, but especially Tony is going to be a huge target. Sarah, everyone is already telling us, is a huge target. And then on top of that, I think players will be more likely to try to separate Amber and Rob before they would separate Sandra and Rob. So in Amber, Tony, and Sarah, she has three good threats that might be considered a bigger threat than she is. But I mean, I think that's how she won Heroes vs. Villains, because even though she was a winner, people just didn't consider her a threat, consider her an in-game threat. But now they do know that she can win twice going in. She's the only one in this 20-person cast that has proved that so far. And so I'm anxious to see how she'll fare. I think it would be smart for them to keep her around and pick her off at maybe 10 or 8. Once she gets down to 8, you have to know you cannot let her sit at the end. The jury might not want to award her the prize a third time. But at the same time, Russell thought it was good for him to sit against two winners in Parvati and Sandra, and he got beaten by both of them. So if she makes it to the end for a third time on her fourth run, I think that it's just as likely that the jury would want to award it to her just for the fact that they let her do that again. And as far as the list that I made, Sandra's one of only 5 people as of the end of the season, or I guess start of the season, that will have played exactly 4 times. Ozzy, Sari, Tyson, Rupert, and Sandra are the only people in Survivor history to have played that number of times. Rob will be hitting his 5th time. I don't count the fact that she was featured on season 39 to really be playing, so you could say she was featured on 5 seasons, but she's one of the only people to play 4 seasons. And then she falls under the same category as Ethan, actually, as players who have lost after winning. So she won twice and then she lost once. So she knew what it felt like to win, and she recently learned what it feels like to lose. Whether that'll change her strategy or not, we'll just have to see. And then she falls under the category of a player on this season that was beaten by another player. She was beaten by Sarah. So Sarah has beaten her in a previous season. Next up, we have Amber Mariano, formerly known as, I always have trouble pronouncing this, Amber Burkich. She's 41 now, but she played in season 2 Australian Outback and in season 8 All Stars, which was her winning season. You know, I still remember when I was a kid and the cast came out for All Stars. I remember, to be honest, thinking, why is she in this cast? How is she an All Star? But even back then, I was able to realize that she was kind of there for Jerry. At least that's my personal opinion. She was there as a buffer for Jerry, because they thought that Jerry would get voted out so easily. She was also kind of there, it felt like, to be a young, pretty girl, but she definitely wasn't boring to watch. Rob obviously was kind of the forerunner in their 2-person alliance. They wound up getting married, obviously, had 4 daughters, and so it'll be interesting to see how things have changed for her. But I honestly just don't have too much to say about Amber. Both the games that we saw her play, she stuck behind someone who was a bigger threat in both Jerry and Rob, and that's not a bad strategy. Those types of players don't tend to be my favorite players, but she obviously wound up winning $1 million for it. They've gone on to be on The Amazing Race. I don't necessarily think that Amber herself is a huge threat, but I think that people will look at her as someone who they need to vote off to weaken Rob. If they let Rob and Amber run to the end of another season, just be absolutely crazy. It'd just be crazy. And so let's take a look at her tribe. Blue tribe, obviously. As I said before with Sandra, I think that Amber is someone who might get taken out pretty easily. She's not necessarily physically weak, to my knowledge or my memory, but at the same time, you have a lot of pretty strong guys on this tribe, and then you have some really strong girls. Kim was great in challenges. Sandra, not so much. Sarah's great in challenges. Sophie's extremely smart. And so I could see Amber being someone who's honestly a first boot, not only to weaken Rob, but at the early stage of the game, they will want to keep their tribe strong as well. So voting out someone like Tony first, while he seems like a big threat and you got to watch out for him, he can be really, really useful in challenges, especially in those first few immunity challenges that tend to be a little more physical. And so I'm anxious to see how she plays. And I was more excited this time than last time that she was on the cast, obviously because of her connection to Rob. She feels like more of a legend to me because she's in those first 2 seasons, because she beat Rob, because she is connected to Rob. But I want to see some importance to her playing, or something exciting about the fact that she's playing, other than the fact that she's in the only couple in the world that is made up of 2 Survivor winners. As far as my list goes, analyzing people who have played against one another in the past or played multiple times, Amber beat Ethan, which I mentioned before, and she beat Rob. So she's beaten 2 people on this cast in a previous season. And then she falls into the other category of someone who won after losing. So as far as recency bias, she's one of the people who her last imprint on the game was that of a winning game. Our next contestant is on the blue tribe. I could start calling them Dekal and Sele, but I don't know. Red and blue is easier for now, especially for those of you who don't know the 2 names like me. But our next player is going to be Danny Boatwright, coming from season 11, Guatemala. I remember my family we're all huge Chiefs fans, not just because they just won the Super Bowl. My grandma lives in Kansas City. Our family's from there. There are not a lot of teams in the states that neighbor that. I was born in Arkansas. I've actually gone to a Chiefs game every single year up until this year that I moved to China since 2006. My dad actually went to the Super Bowl. And so, why does this all matter? Well, Danny wore a KC hat the whole time. So, my family was naturally rooting for her. And then she wound up winning, and it seemed like the odds were so against her at the merge. I think that her social game is absolutely excellent. For her to weave her way through that alliance and actually make it to the end and actually win. And then Stephanie LaGrossa is someone who was a favorite going in. I mean, they brought them back not only because her and Bobby John were on the worst tribe in Survivor history, but they were really big fan favorites and they were really well liked. And so for her to beat Stephanie at the end, it wasn't shocking because she played an amazing game and Stephanie wound up upsetting a lot of people, but it was just really impressive. And I don't know if you guys have heard, but she's actually known for not feeding into the fact that the cameramen, when they're interviewing, doing the talking heads, the shots when the survivors are talking to the camera directly, she's actually known for kind of making the production team a little cranky because she realized she was getting asked certain questions for certain reasons. And so she would give more ambiguous answers to not give away her game so that the cameramen couldn't then go to the other people she was competing against and give away her information because they always ask leading questions. And it's been a long time since she played, but I don't want there to be too much recency bias with these newer players that we remember so well. They played masterful games or really new school games. She definitely is in the older school tier, even though they had started to try to kind of introduce the immunity idol in that season. Gary Hogaboom obviously got it. But like I said, with all the old school players, I don't want to assume they can't play a new school game. It's about understanding that the game has changed. Richard Hatch put it really well in a recent YouTube video that he did. It's still at its core a social game. There are tons of immunity idols. People like Ben, who are kind of like a social pariah, eventually can play idols and save themselves and that type of thing. But at the core of the game, it's about being able to manage your social interactions. And that's something that she did masterfully in her first season. So I'm really excited to see how she'll fare because in looking at all these players, so many are my favorites. I mean, they're such legends. And she does kind of fall into a tier that I think is a little bit forgettable. Guatemala wasn't anyone's favorite season. If it was, I'm sorry I offended you. And I'm sorry that you actually think that that's the best season of Survivor. It's just such a kind of dirty season to me. Just the way that people on Stephanie's tribe kind of interacted with one another. But I think that Danny has a shot. I don't think she'll be looked at as a big threat on the lines of like a Natalie, a Parvati. So I think that she could have a chance, unless she gets immediately booted, to really get some traction going. And I would love to see how she plays in the modern game of Survivor. Now, jumping back over to the Blue Tribe, Season 13 winner, our next winner at War, Yul Kwon. Season 13, if you don't remember, is the season that was divided by race. And that was obviously extremely controversial. I think that that kind of overshadows somewhat that season itself. But that season gave us Pinner. That season gave us Parvati. That season gave us Ozzy for the first time. It gave us Yul. It was actually a really interesting season. They had the mutiny. And I absolutely loved Yul. I remember I was a senior in high school by the time that he played. And I just like the guy. I mean, he's just an extremely likable guy. And I also really liked Ozzy. So that was a really interesting final tribal council for me because rarely is it that I really want two players to win. One of the only real examples of that I can think of is when Dominic and Wendell went to the end. I was actually a bigger Dominic fan throughout, but I really liked Wendell as well. So this was a great finale. And if anyone doesn't remember, his tribe was down on numbers at the merge, and he was able to so beautifully manipulate Pinner into siding with them because of the fact that he had an idol. And obviously that was an overpowered idol. It was similar to the idol that Tony had in Cagayan. And while I'm really against having that type of idol in the game, the way that both of them, and I'll talk more about Tony later, played the fact that they had that idol was something in and of itself. So I don't like the idea that someone just has two chances, but the way that he played was admirable despite that. And he did manipulate. A lot of people think of him as such a nice guy, and he does come off as such a nice, intelligent person. but he was manipulative, but he was able to do it without seeming to leave his integrity behind. So now we are getting into the age of players who have played since the idol was introduced, and we have seen Yul use an idol to his advantage despite not needing to play it. But despite being old school, despite being in the earlier third, there are 39 seasons now. So if you think of it, it's divided into thirds by 13 seasons. 13 ends the first third, 26 Karamoa ends the second third, and then season 39, which we just saw, would end the third third. But I'm really excited to see Yul play again. He's extremely likable. I can see him coming off as quite a big threat, but let's take a look at his tribe. Again, I think that he kind of has a little bit of safety compared to a lot of these other players. Sarah, Tony, I already said it. They're going to be huge targets. Amber, Sandra, they're going to be huge targets. And then we have Tyson on that tribe as well. So I think that Yul being someone who's necessary at the beginning stages of the game, who despite being over 40 is still clearly really physically fit, I think he'll be an asset to his tribe. I can see him, like I said about Ethan, getting picked off kind of in a Joe Anglin position post-merge shortly after, because people wouldn't want him to make a run to the end because he's not only physically fit, but he's extremely intelligent. But I'm excited to see how he'll play. But he's one of definitely the top 5 that I'm excited to see play again, and he's one of my favorite winners ever. And also just imagine if Yul hadn't beaten Ozzy. If Ozzy had won that, I just wonder, it's a side note, but I wonder what Ozzy's legacy on Survivor would have been like, because he's played 4 times now. I just wonder if he would have played that many times, if he would have been on the season with Coach especially, if they would have had him back in Micronesia, which had no other winners up to that point. And then Yul also falls into the category of someone who has beaten someone else on this season. I'll give you 1 second to think about it. Should be pretty obvious. Parvati. So in Parvati's original season, she lost to Yul, so that's an interesting dynamic. Back to the blue tribe. We've got Parvati Shallow. What a name. And Parvati, I would say, is one person that people remember whether they still watch Survivor or not, partially from playing in 3 seasons previously. Parvati wasn't one of my favorites until Heroes vs. Villains. She was good casting in Cook Islands, I thought. She obviously lost to Yul, like I said, in Yul's segment, but she wasn't one of my favorites. I mean, she was definitely kind of a villain, hence being put on the villains tribe. By Micronesia, she was one of the things that actually made that season interesting. That's not one of my favorite seasons, despite having a decent half of its cast. But she definitely kept things interesting, and she was one of the few people, Eliza and Sari being included in this category, that were actually strategizing. Now it's Heroes vs. Villains where she really won me over. And what I consider to be the second best season of all time, for that cast to be so strong, and for me to wind up rooting for her, not only in the end game, but from really early on. I just loved the alliance with her and Russell, all her little asides about eating Russell's heart, and there are just so many little memorable quotes from that season. Now, she obviously didn't pull out the win there, but she did get close. She got second place, obviously closer than Russell, but she just hustled so hard in that season. I just found it to be really an impressive game. And then for her to make it to the end as a winner is obviously impressive as well. But it's interesting because you wouldn't think Russell kind of falls into the category of a GOAT, and he doesn't necessarily, but Parvati knew from so early on that not only was he protecting her, but that he would not win at the end despite not having seen Samoa previously to Heroes vs. Villains. But I think it's interesting, Russell kind of thought that he was pulling her along. She thought that she was the head of the dragon. But I'm really interested to see how she's going to fare in this season, because she really does stick out as a threat. Taking a look at her tribe, she's going to be a big threat. You know, I think Rob's the person that sticks out as the number 1 biggest threat, probably in the game. Him and Sarah are the ones that all the other cast members have said they are the most worried about, but definitely of the girls here, Natalie and Parvati. But I think Parvati, because of her villainous tendencies, you know, Natalie did have to betray people at certain points, but she was extremely loyal to Jeremy, and Jeremy's actually on her tribe again, so I'd be surprised if they didn't work together. So I think of the girls especially, she's definitely the one in the biggest risk at the beginning of the game. And I don't think that her risk level will wear down as the season goes. She's not kind of one that I think, oh, if she makes it past the first couple rounds, she'll be okay. For her, it's all about alliances, trying to form them despite having a certain reputation. And then beyond that, idols. I would love to see. I'm glad that Heroes vs. Villains had idols, but what would that season have been like if she hadn't had idols in that season? So I think idols could be a key to her going far, playing idols correctly, possibly building loyalty with idols, but that runs the risk of her getting voted out with them in her pocket. And I just don't have high hopes for Parvati, but I hope she proves me wrong because she's one of my favorite, not only female winners, but favorite winners of all time, despite her winning season not being one of my favorites. And as far as the list that I made on Survivor Obsessed Chat of how this cast has interacted with each other in previous seasons, Parvati actually falls into a couple of interesting categories. She's actually been beaten by two different people in this season. We already mentioned Yul. I gave you a second. Second one's Sandra. And as far as players to win after losing, lose after winning, she's actually the only person on the entire cast that falls into the category of someone who both lost after winning and won after losing, which simply means that her middle season was her winning season. But I find it interesting that she lost, she came back, changed things up, she won, and then she came back and she lost again. Our next winner is Rob Mariano. Now, love him or hate him, you have to admit, Rob is pretty much the male face of Survivor at this point, especially with the absence of Richard Hatch. I'll definitely be doing a video about those winners that were not chosen to be on this season. But you have to admit, Rob really represents Survivor. It took him 4 times to win. That's the most times it's ever taken someone to win for their first time. But his final game in season 22 against Russell was masterfully played, to the point that it was boring. And it's clear that Survivor means so much to him. I actually thought that I was going to hate the Sandra Robb twist in season 39, but I like seeing him again. But I don't know if you guys noticed, he was saying Amber instead of Amba. But Survivor has given him his partner in life, in by proxy 4 daughters. He'll be the only person to have played 5 times. And then I don't really like considering Island of the Idols as him being a part of the game. But we can say that he was featured in 6 seasons. He played 5 seasons, was featured in 1, so he's been a main part of 6 seasons, and this is his 5th time playing. But instead of starting with his winning season, let's talk about Marquesas for a minute. Marquesas is one of the only seasons that I have not watched at least twice. He got voted out in the middle, but I more than anything, I remember him being an interesting character. He was memorable. He was one of the first people to ever have a nickname, Boston Rob. He's actually even been mentioned on the show 30 Rock. Alec Baldwin mentions Boston Rob. And so he was a player in that season, and he was interesting. And when he came back to All Stars, unlike Amber, I was excited to see him back. And in All Stars, we really got to see Rob's true potential. But obviously the biggest flaw of his game in All Stars was jury management. He went in with what sounds like a lot of preseason alliances, and because of his connection with Amber, because of his relationship with Amber, because of wanting to keep her in the game, he wound up breaking a lot of those alliances, not just because of Amber, but because of decisions he made, especially post-merge. But I remember when Amber was announced as the winner, I was disappointed. I definitely thought that Rob played a masterful game. Obviously, more people on the jury thought that Amber deserved to win, and so she did. He came back in Heroes vs. Villains. I actually thought that would be the last we'd see of Rob. It seems like so long ago, but that really did seem like new school versus old school. You know, him and Russell are both on the Villains tribe, and Russell just seems to run circles around him game-wise. But obviously in the finale, we have Russell and Rob exchanging words, kind of alluding to another season. I'm not sure if that was actually the jumping point as far as producers' decisions go. But that brings us to his winning game, which was season 22. A lot of people think it's overshadowed with Redemption Island, which a lot of time was given to that. Russell obviously kind of had to eat his words there, because he got voted out so early. I believe he got voted out 3rd, and then Rob wound up winning the season. And so Russell did not win Heroes vs. Villains, where they faced off, and Rob did wind up winning the 2nd season where they faced off, which was season 22. That season is another game where it was just so obvious that he should be the winner, and I all the respect in the world for him winning, but he played it so masterfully that it was almost boring. And the tribe that was on the outs post-merge, they just kept saying, I can't believe you're not going to get rid of Rob. You're not going to get rid of Rob. And then Rob's one that created the buddy system, meaning no one in his alliance was supposed to go off by themselves. And if they did, that was considered very suspicious. He did take 2 goats to the end, but almost everyone in that season came off as goats. I could see an argument that Grant possibly could have won against him because he was really strong, he was really likable. But kudos to Rob for realizing that he needed to cut ties with Grant when he did, and the way that he handled the Andrea and Matt situation was so interesting. I thought everyone was going to turn on him at that point, but he already had them so, for lack of a better word, brainwashed that just absolutely wasn't going to happen. And then, like I said, he took 2 goats to the end, Philip and Natalie, and he won. And the tribe that kept trying to get him out, the opposing tribe, just handed it to him. I mean, they just tore Philip apart, and they had to give him props. He deserved the win in that season. And so even though it took him 4 times to win, I think he was absolutely deserving. And I was proud of him. I was glad that he finally won. And let's take a look at his tribe, because I think Rob's absolutely considered the biggest threat in the game. Sarah's a close second, but Rob, especially, not only because he represents Survivor, because he's played 4 seasons, because everyone has gotten to see him play in very different ways multiple times, but because of his connections, his obvious connections with Sandra, with Amber, and with other cast members. I don't see Rob going that far, but maybe he has enough connections to where he would be able to do that. And he has enough kind of older school players, even though he was against Parvati in Heroes vs. Villains, there are enough old school players on his tribe that he could try to align with them and just kind of pick off the new guys. But I would not be shocked if he was a first boot. But I also think Parvati's a likely first boot as well. So I'm kind of glad that they're on the same tribe. Sarah, being another big threat, is on the other tribe. But I'm not sure exactly who they would try to go for first between Rob and Parvati. We haven't seen it, so it could completely be someone else. They could pick off Michelle because they don't think that she's as strong as some of the other people. Or they could pick off Ben because of his Ben bombs and because he's an idol king. But I would be very, very shocked if Rob made it to merge. But he's definitely one that I'm rooting for. I'm extremely glad he's back, especially since Richard's not back. I think that they absolutely either needed Rob or Richard to really legitimize this season, despite all 20 of the cast members being brilliant players. But in my list that I made on Survivor Obsessed chat of cast interconnectivity, he actually falls into a couple of interesting categories as well. He's a player that falls into a player that won after losing, obviously, because he lost 3 times and then he won. And then Rob and Parvati are the only 2 on this entire cast that have lost to 2 people on this cast. I'll give you a second. Rob has lost to, obviously, Amber and to Sandra, who he seems to have a good connection with. But he has lost to both of those players, both the players that he seems the closest to be tied the closest to. But yeah, that'll do it for part 1 of my 3-part series on this upcoming season. But yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. Please subscribe. I really want to keep doing these videos. I absolutely love talking Survivor, and please leave a comment below. I legitimately want to see what you guys have to say about what I have to say, what people's opinions are of these 7 cast members that we've gone over so far, and who you guys want to win, who you think will win, because who I want to win is very different than who I think will win. And I'll get into a little more of that in my final part of the video. Not only my predictions, but who I am rooting for number 1. It's very clear to me to win, though I don't know that they had that good of a shot. But yeah, please comment, like, subscribe, love, live, share, and peace out.